What was so wrong with me wanting one funny moment at my own wedding? I was not leaving my husband. I was not destroying a family. I was only remembering the feeling of my first marriage, the wild one, the stupid one, the one that made me feel young before life turned quiet. So I pretended to marry my ex-husband again before I married my real husband. One small joke. One old memory. One room full of people who needed to stop taking everything so seriously. My real husband just stood near the bar, calm, with his hand flat around his glass like he was already bored. I thought he could wait 5 minutes for his turn. By the end of that week, I was the one waiting for permission to see my own daughter. I am Serena Vale, 34 years old, an event planner, and of course people now talk about me like I walked into that room with a knife instead of a joke. I was not leaving my husband. I was not breaking my daughter's home. I was only remembering what it felt like to be young, wanted, and a little dangerous, before life turned into school lunches, shared passwords, and a man who loved me like I was another task on his calendar. So yes, I pretended to marry my ex-husband again, before I married my real husband. One small performance, one old memory, one room full of people who needed to stop treating marriage like a funeral with flowers. Nathan just stood near the bar, calm, with his hand flat around his glass, the way he always went calm when he did not know how to fight for anything. I thought he could wait 5 minutes for his turn. The restaurant was perfect because I had made it perfect. Warm brick walls, white roses in glass jars, small gold candles on every table, a window near the front where the late afternoon light made everyone look softer than they were. I had chosen that place because Nathan once said he liked restaurants where he could hear me talk without pretending to enjoy music. That was the kind of man he was. Practical, careful, safe. And for years I told myself safe was enough. We had one good ritual before everything became heavy. Every Friday, after Lena fell asleep, Nathan made grilled cheese sandwiches too late at night, and we sat on the kitchen floor because the chairs were always covered with laundry. He cut mine diagonally because I said once, years ago, that it tasted better that way. That sounds sweet, I know. It was sweet. But sweetness can still become a room with no windows. He remembered the sandwich. He forgot the woman eating it. Of course, nobody likes when a wife says that part out loud. They want loyalty to mean silence. They want gratitude to mean you stop needing anything else. My mother Vivian understood me better than most people. She said Nathan was a good provider, but sometimes good providers start acting like the whole woman has been provided for. She laughed when I told her my idea for the wedding prank. She said it was bold, and I needed bold again. My sister Tessa did not laugh. She asked why Marco had to be part of it. I told her she was acting like an accountant at a birthday party. 2 sisters. 2 reactions. One of them knew how to live. Marco Bellini had been my first husband, though calling that marriage a marriage was generous. We were 24, dramatic, broke, and convinced passion could pay rent if we wanted it badly enough. It lasted 11 months. Still, when he looked at me, I remembered a version of myself that had not yet learned how to lower her voice in her own home. He had green eyes, dark hair, and that careless smile people forgive too quickly. He was a photographer, so he always knew how to stand where the light helped him. Nathan never cared about light. Nathan cared about whether the parking meter was paid. The plan was simple. I would walk in with my bouquet. The music would start. Everyone would expect me to go to Nathan, who was waiting in his navy wedding suit. Instead, I would turn toward Marco, who stood near the front with our friend Miles pretending to officiate. We would say a few fake lines. Marco would call me his wife again. I would laugh. Then I would turn to Nathan and say the real groom could come forward now. The room would explode. Nathan would finally have to react. Maybe he would roll his eyes and pull me close. Maybe he would kiss me harder than usual. Maybe for once he would look afraid to lose me. That was the part I did not say to anyone. Not to Vivian. Not to Marco. Not even to myself for more than a second. When I stood in the small bridal bathroom fixing my lipstick in the mirror, Marco came in without knocking. He asked if I was sure. He said it softly, but he was smiling, so I knew he wanted me to say yes. I told him of course I was sure. Of course Nathan would survive a joke. Of course a man who wanted to be my husband should be able to handle 5 minutes of my history. Marco adjusted his tie and said Nathan looked stiff enough to crack. I laughed because it was easier than admitting I had noticed the same thing. Through the bathroom door, I heard the guitar begin. My cue. The room turned when I walked out. First warm faces, then confused faces. Then the little wave of whispering that moves through a crowd when people realize the script has changed. Nathan stood by the bar instead of the front because that was where I had told him to wait until the surprise. His father, Graham, stood beside him, already frowning. Lena sat in the front row in her cream dress, swinging her legs, looking from me to Nathan and back again. My daughter's face should have slowed me down. It did not. I kept walking. Marco opened his hands like a groom in a movie, and people laughed because laughter is what people do when they do not know whether they are allowed to be uncomfortable. Vivian laughed loudest. That helped. My mother's laugh always made a wrong thing feel approved. Miles began the fake ceremony. He said we were gathered to witness Serena and Marco finding their way back to each other. I lifted my bouquet higher and smiled like I had invented joy. Marco took my hand. His thumb brushed my ring finger, the one still waiting for Nathan's ring, and I made a small joke about some rings needing patience. A few guests laughed. Tessa did not. Graham did not. Nathan did not. He only stood near the bar with that flat hand around his glass, calm as a closed door. I read it as weakness. I read everything that way when it helped me keep moving. Miles asked Marco if he took me again, and Marco said he did. Miles asked me if I took Marco again, and I said I did too. The words came out brighter than I expected. The room shifted, not fully against me. Not yet. Just enough that I felt the floor under my shoes. Then Marco leaned in and kissed me. It was supposed to be quick, a punctuation mark, a joke with lips. But he held it longer, and for 3 seconds I let him, because 3 seconds can feel like proof when you are starving to be chosen. When I pulled away, I turned toward Nathan with my best smile and announced that the real groom could come forward now. Nobody exploded with laughter. A few people clapped because people will clap to escape silence. Nathan walked toward me slowly. He did not glare. He did not perform pain for the room. He stopped beside me, looked at Marco, then looked at me, and asked in that soft, specific way of his whether this was the part where he was allowed to marry his own bride. I told him not to be dramatic. I said everyone understood it was funny. He looked down at my bouquet, then at the wedding ring on the small velvet tray, and placed his hand flat on the table beside it. For one strange second, the whole room seemed to wait for him instead of me. Then he picked up the ring. The real ceremony began. Nathan said the words. I said mine. He kissed me when Miles told him to, but there was no heat in it. Fine, I thought. Let him sulk. By dinner, I would fix the mood. By dessert, I would make the room mine again. And by the end of the night, Nathan would understand that marrying me meant sharing the spotlight with every version of me that came before him. The reception did not recover as quickly as I wanted it to. I had planned for laughter to roll through the room, for people to slap Nathan on the shoulder and tell him he had married a woman who kept life interesting, for the whole thing to become one of those stories guests repeated for years with champagne in their hands. Instead, the air stayed careful. People smiled with only half their mouths. They hugged me like they were checking whether I was still the same woman they had known an hour earlier. Of course I acted like everything was fine, because that was what I did for a living. I moved between tables, touched shoulders, thanked people, adjusted the flowers near the cake, and made little jokes about how every wedding needed a twist. Vivian stayed close to me, laughing too loudly, telling people Nathan had always been too serious and that I was exactly the kind of bride who could wake up a room. I loved her for that. I needed her for that. 2 glasses of Prosecco. 3 people avoiding my eyes. One sister standing near the dessert table, not eating, just watching me like I was a spill spreading across white linen. Nathan sat at our sweetheart table with Lena beside him, cutting her chicken into tiny pieces while guests came up to congratulate us. He smiled politely. He thanked them. He placed his hand flat on the table whenever someone mentioned the prank, calm and still, like he was waiting for weather to pass. I read it as sulking. I told myself he was punishing me with silence because he had no better weapon. When our neighbour asked me whether Marco was really my ex-husband, I explained that yes, technically, but it was ancient history and everyone with a sense of humour understood that. She looked past me toward Nathan before saying it was creative. That word should have pleased me. It sounded like a compliment from someone trying not to choose a side. Marco made choosing a side much easier for himself. He worked the room like he had paid for it. He told a table of my cousins that our first wedding had been done at City Hall with bad coffee and worse shoes, so this fake one was already an improvement. They laughed. I laughed too, because if I did not laugh, I would have to admit he was acting less like a guest and more like a groom who had not been dismissed. Nathan saw him touching the small of my back near the bar. He did not interrupt. He only asked, later, in that soft way, whether I had wanted him at the wedding as my husband or as the final reveal. I told him that was a cruel way to twist something playful. That was my first refusal of the night, moral and clean. I said he knew who he married, and he had no right to shrink me because he felt embarrassed. He looked at me for a long second, then asked what had changed between us that made me need Marco standing in his place. I hated the question because it was too close to the part I did not want to explain. So I kissed his cheek in front of the room and told him not to ruin the reception. Public affection can be a leash when used correctly. I thought he would understand that. He did not pull away, but he did not lean in either. Later, during what should have been our first dance, Marco appeared at my side before Nathan did. The band had started the song Nathan picked, a slow old one he said reminded him of Friday nights and grilled cheese on the floor. Sweet, safe, predictable. Marco offered his hand as if the evening still belonged to him. I should have waved him off. Instead, I let him spin me once, just once, because people were already watching, and I wanted the moment to feel light again. Nathan stood at the edge of the dance floor, Lena's small hand inside his. My daughter asked him something. He bent down and answered without looking away from me. That bothered me more than anger would have. Anger gives you something to push against. His calm gave me nothing. When Nathan finally came to me, he did not take my waist at first. He asked if the song was still ours. I told him songs did not belong to anyone and that he was making me feel trapped at my own wedding. The words came out sharper than I planned, but once they were out, I kept them. He danced with me then, careful space between us, one hand at my back, the other holding mine like an agreement he no longer trusted. I told myself he was choosing to be cold. I told myself I was the one trying. By 10, Lena was tired and confused, her little flower crown crooked over one ear. Nathan said he was taking her home. Not asking, saying. I told him we still had cake, photos, guests, and a bride who should not be abandoned on her wedding night. He said Lena had school on Monday and she had asked 3 times why Uncle Marco kissed Mommy first. That was unfair. Bringing Lena into it made him look wounded and responsible at the same time, which was exactly the kind of quiet performance people rewarded. I told him he was using our child to shame me. He placed his hand flat on the back of the chair, thanked my mother for the evening, and left with our daughter holding his hand. Vivian said he would come around. Marco said Nathan looked like a man who had lost a contest he never agreed to enter. I laughed because everyone expected me to. I stayed until the candles burned low. When I came home, the house was too clean, too bright, too Nathan. My wedding shoes pinched the backs of my heels as I walked into the kitchen. He was there in his suit pants and white shirt, sleeves rolled, tie gone. Lena's backpack was packed by the door. Her lunchbox was already washed. Practical, of course. Always practical. He asked why Marco knew about the private vows I had written and never shown him. I said Marco guessed the tone because he knew me before I became someone's calendar wife. Nathan asked if that was what he was to me. A calendar. I said he was proving my point by turning a joke into a meeting. He looked at the ring on my hand, then at my face, and asked if there was anything else I wanted to tell him while the house was quiet. I could have said many things. I could have said Marco had been texting me for weeks. I could have said the prank had started as a joke and become a test. I could have said I missed feeling wanted so badly that I let my past stand where my husband should have stood. Instead, I told him he was tired and jealous, and that we could talk when he was ready to be kind. He went to the guest room. No slammed door. No speech. Just the soft click of a man deciding not to beg. I stood in the kitchen wearing my wedding dress, twisting my ring around my finger, and told myself the real marriage would begin once Nathan finished being dramatic. For the next 2 days, I treated Nathan's silence like a childish phase. That was easier than treating it like information. He slept in the guest room, packed Lena's lunch, drove her to school, answered me politely, and left the room whenever the air got too tight. Of course I called that punishment. Of course I told myself he wanted me to chase him so he could feel important again. 2 mornings, 4 careful conversations. 1 wedding ring that suddenly felt heavier than it had at the ceremony. I still wore it because taking it off would have looked like guilt, and I was not giving Nathan the satisfaction of seeing guilt on my hand. At work, I made the story smaller and prettier. I told the girls in the break room that my wedding prank had been bold, that Nathan had acted wounded because he did not like surprises, and that Marco had only played along because he understood my sense of humor. A few of them laughed. 1 woman from payroll asked whether Lena had been confused. I said children are confused by everything adults do and poured coffee before she could answer. That afternoon, Marco texted me a photo from the reception. It was not one of the official shots. He must have taken it from a guest or from someone's phone. In the picture, he was kissing me in the middle of the room, 1 hand at my waist, my bouquet pressed between us. Behind us near the bar, Nathan stood with his hand flat around his glass. He looked calm, too calm, like a man watching a train pass from the wrong side of the tracks. Marco sent another message saying the photo looked like a poster for the marriage I should have chosen. I should have deleted it. Instead, I stared at it under my desk until my coffee went cold. That evening, I went to Marco's studio. I told myself it was only to ask him not to send things like that again. The studio smelled like dust, camera bags, and the citrus soap he always used. Brick walls, black frames, a long table covered with lenses and memory cards. He had already printed the photo and pinned it near his editing desk, large enough that Nathan's face in the background was clear. I asked why he printed it. He said the composition was honest. He said every wedding needed 1 true image, and ours had finally gotten one. I laughed because I wanted to be the kind of woman who could handle that sentence. He asked if Nathan was still sleeping apart from me. I told him Nathan was being dramatic. Marco said maybe Nathan knew how replaceable he looked. That word should have offended me. Instead, it warmed a place in me I did not want to name. Replaceable. Not me. Him. For once, I was not the woman waiting for a tired man to look up from a laptop. I was the woman men compared themselves over. So I took a picture of the print on Marco's wall, cropped it just enough to make it look stylish and not cruel, and sent it to a private group chat with old friends from the wedding. I wrote that some women need a first husband to remind the second one not to get lazy. The replies came fast. Laughing faces, shocked faces. 1 friend asking whether I was brave or insane. Vivian sent 3 clapping emojis and told me that was her daughter. Tessa did not respond at all. Nathan did not either at first. That made me bolder. Silence always did. When I came home, he was at the dining table helping Lena with spelling words. The light above them was too bright, making everything look plain. Lena had her pencil between her teeth. Nathan had his hand flat beside her notebook, patient and still. He looked up and asked softly whether I had posted a photograph from the wedding. I asked who was spying on me now. He said someone sent it to him because people were worried the joke had stopped being private. I hated that word. Worried. It made them sound kind and me sound unstable. He said Lena had asked that morning why Mommy needed a first husband if she already had Daddy. Lena looked up then, her small face open and waiting, and for 1 second the room had no joke in it, only a child with the wrong question in her mouth. I turned it back into a fight because fighting was easier than answering her. I told Nathan he was putting adult shame into a child's head. I said he was using her innocence to make me look dirty. He did not raise his voice. He told Lena to finish the last 3 words in her room. She went slowly, still watching us over her shoulder. When she was gone, Nathan asked me to take the post down. Not shouted, not demanded. Asked. That bothered me more than a demand would have, because a demand would have let me call him controlling. I told him I would not let him police my friendships, my humour, or my past. He looked at the ring on my finger, then at the sink where I had left the dish soap open, and said the past was not the problem when I kept inviting it to sit at our table. I twisted the ring once. It caught on my knuckle. I made myself smile and said maybe this ring should learn to wait its turn too. His eyes moved to my hand, then to my face. Then his palm settled flat on the table again, calm as wood. I read it as him giving up. That night, I deleted the post only from the group chat, not from my phone. I told myself that was compromise. A smart woman knows when to appear reasonable without surrendering the whole point. Vivian called and said Nathan would calm down once people stopped feeding his pride. Her voice had less sparkle than before, but I ignored that. Marco texted late, asking if I had survived the husband lecture. I answered with a photo of my ring beside a half-empty wine glass, because I wanted him to know I was still in control of the story. The next morning, Tessa finally replied to the group, not with a joke, but with one short message saying Lena should never have had to ask that question. I stared at it for a long time. Then I muted the chat and started planning a family brunch. If everyone wanted to turn one wedding prank into a moral trial, fine. I knew how to arrange a room. I knew how to guide a conversation. I knew how to make people see the version of me I wanted them to see. And this time, Nathan would not get to hide behind silence while I carried the whole performance alone. I chose the hotel lounge because neutral places make people behave better. That was something I learned from planning corporate dinners for couples who hated each other by dessert, but still smiled for the sponsor photos. The room had pale green walls, brass lamps, and wide windows facing the parking lot, ordinary enough to calm everyone, and expensive enough to remind them I knew how to host. I booked the long table near the back, where voices would not carry too far. I chose the menu myself. Fruit, eggs, toast, coffee, nothing dramatic, because dramatic was exactly what everyone had decided to call me. Of course I did not call it a confrontation. I called it a family brunch. That sounded softer. That sounded like a woman trying. 2 confirmations. 1 late reply from Tessa. No answer from Vivian until almost midnight, when she sent a heart and said she would try to come if her headache improved. I stared at that message longer than it deserved. My mother never had headaches when gossip was warm. She had headaches when consequences entered the room. Still, I told myself she was tired, not retreating. I told myself everyone got nervous before the truth was spoken correctly. Nathan came by the house the evening before the brunch to pick up Lena for her swimming lesson. He had started doing that more, stepping into the hallway instead of the living room, keeping 1 foot near the door as if my house had become a place he only visited by appointment. Lena ran to get her towel, and for a moment he and I stood alone under the narrow hall light. I had planned to be calm. I had even rehearsed the tone. Soft, tired, reasonable. A woman who had been misunderstood but was generous enough to explain herself again. I told him the brunch could help if he stopped arriving like a prosecutor. He asked with that same quiet patience whether Marco needed to be there for a conversation about our marriage. I said Marco was part of the misunderstanding, so excluding him would only make people imagine worse things. Nathan looked at me, then looked past me at the framed photo from Lena's kindergarten graduation. His hand went flat against the door frame. Not hard, just steady. He said I kept calling pain misunderstanding because misunderstanding sounded cleaner. I hated that because it sounded like something he had waited to say. I told him he had no right to make himself the only wounded person in this house. I said I had spent years feeling like a file he maintained, a calendar he checked, a mother he respected but no longer saw. That part was true. It came out before I could polish it, and for once he did not correct me. He said he knew he had been bad at showing wanting. He said he thought staying, providing, and never making me afraid was love because he grew up in a house where noise meant trouble. He said it without self-pity, without a speech, just fact. Lena's towel slipped from her hands at the top of the stairs and the small sound broke the moment. I looked at Nathan's face then, really looked, and for one clean second I saw something I had been stepping over for years. His quiet was not empty. It was effort. His calm was not proof that nothing hurt him. It was where he put the hurt so Lena would not have to hold it. The thought opened like a door, plain and ugly. Then I closed it. I picked up Lena's towel, smiled too brightly, and told him that if he had wanted credit for being silent, he should have married someone who could read minds. He nodded once. Not defeated, not angry, just finished with that part of the conversation. After they left, I stood in the hallway with my ring tight on my finger and made myself breathe through my nose until the feeling passed. Near clarity is useless if it makes you smaller. I needed to be larger by morning. I called Marco next. He answered on the fourth ring, distracted, with music in the background. I told him he needed to come to brunch and be normal. Not charming, not provocative, normal. He laughed and said normal was more Nathan's department. I did not laugh. That bothered him. He asked whether I was starting to regret our little wedding moment. I said regret was for people who lost control of the story, and I had not lost control of anything. He went quiet for half a second too long. Then he said he would come if he could, but he had a client viewing in the afternoon and did not want drama attached to his name. His name, not mine, not ours, his. I explained that away before it could hurt. Creative men are allergic to responsibility. That did not mean he was leaving me alone. Tessa arrived early the next morning, before I had finished curling my hair. She stood in my bedroom doorway holding 2 dresses I had asked her to bring back from the tailor, and said the blue one looked better because it made me seem less like I was trying to win. I told her brunches were not trials. She said no, trials had rules. I asked whether Nathan had been talking to her. She did not deny it fast enough. 1 pause, 2 folded dresses, 3 inches of space between us that felt wider than the room. I told her she had always preferred wounded men because they made her feel useful. She set the dresses on my bed and said Lena had cried after school because a boy asked if her mum had 2 husbands. I wanted to blame Nathan for that too, but the sentence sat between us with nowhere to go. So I reached for the blue dress and told Tessa she could either help me calm everyone down or join the line of people enjoying my humiliation. She looked tired then, not cruel, and said she would come because somebody should watch Lena's mother tell the truth without making a show of it. I chose the cream dress instead. At the hotel, the table looked exactly how I wanted it. Ordered. Bright. Mine. Graham arrived first and did not kiss my cheek. Tessa sat beside him, which annoyed me more than it should have. Marco came 10 minutes later in a dark jacket, carrying no flowers, no apology, only that careless face. Nathan arrived last with Lena's backpack over one shoulder, though Lena was spending the morning with a friend and was not even there. Practical, of course. Always prepared for a child who needed him. He placed the backpack by his chair and rested his hand flat on the table beside it. I watched that hand and told myself, again, that silence was not strength. It was only the shape weak men took when they knew the room belonged to someone else. The brunch began exactly how I wanted it to begin: polite, tense, and waiting for me. That mattered. A messy room belongs to whoever cries first. An ordered room belongs to whoever knows when to lift her glass. I sat at the center of the long table, cream dress smooth over my knees, wedding ring bright against the napkin, Marco on my left, and Nathan across from me with Lena's backpack by his chair like a little flag of responsibility. Of course he brought the backpack. Of course he wanted everyone to see him as the steady parent before anyone had even accused him of not being one. I watched Graham notice it. I watched Tessa notice it. 2 allies on his side before coffee. 1 empty chair where Vivian should have been. I texted my mother under the table asking if she was close. She answered 10 minutes later with 1 sentence about her headache getting worse. That was all. No joke. No heart. No promise to call after. The absence was small on the screen and huge in my hand. I put the phone face down and smiled harder. I told everyone I had invited them because the wedding had been twisted into something ugly, and I wanted to say the truth in a room where people knew me. Marco leaned back, pleased to be included until I said his name too clearly. I explained that Marco was my first husband, yes, and that pretending to marry him again had been a joke about my past, not an attack on my present. I said Nathan had turned 5 minutes of theatre into a whole punishment. I said women were allowed to have histories without their husbands acting like those histories were crimes. That line landed well enough. One of our friends nodded. Marco smiled again. I felt the table leaning back toward me, so I crossed the line I had come there to cross. I placed my hand over Marco's wrist for just 1 second and said that at least he remembered the version of me that existed before lunches, bills, school forms, and a man who thought love meant keeping the house running. Nathan looked at my hand, then at Marco, then at me. His palm went flat beside the coffee cup. Calm. Still. I read it as surrender. He asked me quietly whether I understood what I was asking everyone to excuse. I told him I was asking everyone to understand what he never had. Then I said the one thing he could not deny. He had made me feel managed, not wanted. He remembered every password, every appointment, every payment. But he forgot that I was a woman before I was his wife, and Lena's mother. The table went still because even people who disliked me knew that part was true. Nathan did not argue. He said he had failed me there. He said he thought being reliable was the safest kind of love because he came from a house where loud love broke things. For one breath, he sounded almost human instead of careful. Then he said we could stop making each other smaller. He said we could separate quietly, protect Lena, and leave the wedding where it belonged, behind adults who had already done enough damage. That was his final offer. Clean, controlled, almost insulting in its calm. I refused it with a laugh because the room was watching, and I would not let him turn mercy into another way to stand above me. I told him he did not get to humiliate himself at our wedding, sulk for a week, and then act noble because I refused to become a quiet wife in a quiet life. Marco shifted beside me, but I ignored it. Tessa looked down at her plate. Graham's jaw tightened. Nathan only listened. The quieter he became, the louder I felt inside my own body. So I kept going. I said if he wanted to leave, he could leave, but he would not take the story with him. He would not make me the villain because he did not know how to keep a woman feeling alive. I reached for my phone again, hoping Vivian had changed her mind, but the screen stayed blank. Fine. I did not need my mother to save the room. I had already done it. Nathan picked up the slim envelope beside his plate and set it in front of him without opening it. Not threatening, not dramatic, just placed there. I smiled because it looked like the last prop of a man who had run out of words. I thought the brunch was over. I thought he had finally understood that everyone had heard my side. Then Nathan stood up, smiling, and the room went silent before he even touched the envelope. Nathan stood with that same small smile, the one I had mistaken for weakness since the wedding bar, since the kitchen counter, since every quiet moment when I thought he had nothing left to say. His hand rested flat on the table beside the envelope, and for the first time the room watched his stillness instead of my face. He said calmly that I kept calling it one joke, so everyone should understand the whole joke. Then he opened the envelope. Not with rage, not with theatre, just paper. Screenshots of the private group post, a copy of the photo Marco had printed in his studio, messages where I called Nathan safe, dull, and useful. A note from Lena's school counsellor about her asking whether a mommy could have two husbands. Tessa lowered her eyes before I even reached her. Graham did not move. One of our friends read the first page, set it down, and said Nathan had not made the story ugly. I had only lost control of who was telling it. I tried to say he was humiliating me now, but the sentence landed flat. Marco pulled his wrist away from my hand and said he had never agreed to be part of a family fight. Then he stood, took his jacket from the chair, and left before the coffee went cold. Vivian's chair stayed empty. No call, no rescue, no mother laughing too loudly to make my shame sound like courage. The next morning, Nathan's petition for dissolution and a temporary parenting schedule were filed. I stayed in the house, but every room felt borrowed. The accounts were reviewed because Marco's studio lunches had come from our card. Tessa stopped answering casual texts. Marco deleted the wedding photo and blocked me. At work, my brilliant prank became the story people lowered their voices around. I wanted two men to prove I was still worth choosing. Instead, one left first, and the other learned how to leave properly. My wedding ring stayed in the dish by the sink, waiting its turn. I thought my second husband could wait 5 minutes, but he had already spent months learning how to leave me behind.